Welcome to Chemistry 101 online video introduction to Unit 7's lab. The lab for Unit 7 is Chemical Reactions 2. It's also lab number 15 in your lab manual, although I am providing a separate sort of handout that you should work on and use for your lab. So you might ask what happened to Chemical Reactions 1. I didn't think that was the most interesting lab, and you have more than enough information to do Chemical Reactions 2. This lab is actually very similar to one that we do on ground. It's pretty straightforward. You should have all of the background information already to do this lab, and all of that information pretty much comes from Chapter 5 in your book. So if you are having difficulty, I would refer back to Chapter 5. The relevant pieces of Chapter 5 are as follows, or another way of saying that is this week's lab deals with two basic things. Recognizing different types of reactions, and if you remember from Unit 5 we talked about decomposition reactions. That's when sort of you start with one material and it decomposes or it breaks apart into two or more materials. There are synthesis or combination reactions. That's when you have two or more things are converted into one single thing. Combustion reaction has oxygen gas, or O2, on the left side of the equation. There are single replacement and double replacement reactions. Those are single things replacing basically one single atom or group of atoms basically kicking out another group of atoms. Double replacement is you have two sets of reactants that sort of swap partners. And so that's sort of one portion of this week's lab, is you will do a whole bunch of chemical reactions. Actually not a whole bunch, maybe 5, somewhere around that many, and they're going to fall into different categories. There will be decomposition reactions, synthesis reactions, combustion, single and double replacement. The other thing that you'll do is you'll be given the equations, but you'll be asked to balance them. So not only will you do a bunch of chemical reactions, but you'll have to balance them. So the pre-lab is basically more of the same. It's on pages 160 to 161 in your handout, although I will give you a separate handout that has all of the information again. And the idea is you're going to look at a bunch of chemical reactions and you'll say, is this a decomposition? Is it a combustion? Is it single replacement? Is it double replacement? Etc., etc. And in addition, some of the pre-lab questions actually ask you to balance some of these equations. So you're going to get practice doing that. The actual lab is very similar, except you're actually going to do the chemical reactions. So the first part 1 of the lab, you will do a combustion reaction. And basically this is butane. This is the formula for butane. And so you have butane gas, and it will mix with oxygen gas from the air in whatever room you're doing this in. And it will be converted when you heat these two things up. There should be a triangle over this. It will be converted into carbon dioxide gas and liquid water. Your book says gaseous water. For the most part, it's going to be liquid. And the idea behind this is, observe what happens and balance the equation up here. So that's part 1. Part 2, you're going to do a synthesis reaction. It's a little bit weird. Basically, the book just wants you to hold your breath, which is a little bit silly. The HB here stands for hemoglobin. They say that it's solid hemoglobin. That is completely not true. If it was solid hemoglobin, you would probably be dead. The hemoglobin in your bloodstream. So for those of you who don't know, hemoglobin is the molecule in your red blood cells that captures oxygen from your lungs and delivers it to the tissues in your body to give your tissues oxygen. And hemoglobin is dissolved in the liquid in your red blood cells. So hemoglobin is actually aqueous. If it was solid the way that your book has it, you would be dead. And you are not dead if you are listening to this. So although you may want to be in that state after listening to this, you are not. And you are basically, they just ask you to hold your breath. You don't even need to hold your breath. You breathing in, as you breathe in, you will breathe in oxygen gas. It will basically become attached to hemoglobin that's dissolved in your red blood cells. that are passing through your lungs, and then you will make this molecule, which is called oxygenated hemoglobin. And this is dissolved in the liquid in your red blood cells, and then it gets carried to the other tissues. So they have this synthesis reaction. You can balance it. There is a part in your book called Part 3. I'm going to skip that part. It's not really necessary, but there is a synthesis reaction. Part 3 will show you a single replacement reaction. You're going to take solid zinc, and for zinc you are going to use one of the washers that you used in the density experiment. You're going to mix it with citric acid. This is the formula for citric acid. In this case, the citric acid is dissolved in water. There will be a reaction that takes place. It will make something called zinc citrate and hydrogen, and basically you're going to make observations, answer the questions, and balance this equation up here. Part 4 is an example of a double replacement reaction. You basically have two pairs of things. Here's pair number 1. Here's pair number 2. They are going to switch partners. Basically, the zinc is going to switch with the sodium, and this is called sodium phosphate, in case I didn't mention that. So you have zinc citrate, which you actually made over in the reaction in Part 3. You're going to mix it with sodium phosphate, and you are going to make sodium citrate and zinc phosphate. And then the questions are, what do you observe when you perform this reaction? Answer some questions that I might have, balance this reaction. And then Part 5, which is the last chemical reaction that you will do, is a decomposition reaction. You're going to take a solid material. This is called ammonium carbonate, and it will be a solid. You'll scoop a little bit out, put it in a test tube. You're going to heat it up, so there should be a little triangle over this arrow. It's going to turn into ammonia. Some of the ammonia will be a gas that you can smell, so it'll be kind of stinky. Some of it will be dissolved in water because you're going to make some water, and you will also make some carbon dioxide gas. So again, you'll have to record your observations, answer some questions, and balance this chemical equation. So that's it for this particular lab. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to do a handful of chemical reactions. You're going to balance them, and you'll basically get to see what a decomposition reaction is, what a double replacement reaction is, what a single replacement reaction is. Now, I want to make one last point, and that is that many students often sort of look at physically what's going on. They'll look at their test tube and say, oh, it must be a combustion reaction, or oh, it must be a decomposition reaction. That really isn't the way to do it. The way to recognize a decomposition reaction or a combustion or any of these types of reactions is that you have to look at the actual equation. You don't look at the test tube. The equation tells you whether it's a decomposition reaction or not. And if you remember decomposition, you start with one thing. So here's our one thing. And it breaks into two or more things. So here's one thing that's made, two things that are made, three things that are made. So this is a decomposition reaction, not because of something that you observe in the test tube, but it's because of the way the chemical reaction takes place on the piece of paper when you write out the equation. One thing turns into two or more things. That's decomposition. Single replacement, one single thing kicks out, in this case it'll kick out a hydrogen, and the zinc will attach to the rest of the citric acid molecule and release hydrogen. So you can't necessarily look at a test tube where a reaction is taking place and figure out what type of reaction it is. You actually have to look at the equation. So that's it for this lab. I will have a separate handout that is separate from the lab manual that I would prefer that you follow and answer the questions on that.